Morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Colin. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'll let you know in about 3 hours.
All right. Well, don't tell me too much because remember we're live.
No, I know everything's good. I'm always technology is a finicky thing at times. So
On that note, can you hear me okay?
you're great. Everything sounds
Um,
good.
I'm using a different computer than normal. It's got a really wide angle camera, and you're seeing much more of our front guest room than I'd prefer, but it's okay.
Yeah, fortunately, the wider camera that I have here is in my office. The one on my laptop's fairly narrow because I don't know if when I'm at home working, there's a finite area. It looks much nicer than the rest of the area I'm in. I'll say more organized. I won't say nicer. And I will be right. Well, no, actually, we should be good. Let's see. Yeah, I'll be back in a few quick seconds.
All right.
Morning, Mayor.
Hey, Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It was always a test to see whose technology would work for them or not today.
That's what I was doing. I was on here and just kind of running through the drill. Thanks to Ting, I can actually see everything and hear everything now. So,
well, that's a positive.
Yeah.
Good morning, Alex. Good
morning Kevin. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I would say in you, but you just gave that update, so just waiting for Goran. He sent a text saying that he's ready, but I sent a text back saying, join in the session then.
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, let's see if he's.
I saw him in the
networking?
in the people drop down. Not in the networking, but
okay.
in the
I don't see him in the
in
people
attendee
drop
list.
now. But he could be. I'd say if it takes longer than another minute or so, we can get started and fold him in. We also baked a little bit of time for not necessarily navigating to the sessions, but making sure that the technology would work for us. So if I look like Two-Faced of the Dark Knight, it's because this light above my desk went out at about 4:30 yesterday, and there's a nice little backlog in the getting stuff taken care of right now in the mall. So bigger priorities. So if hopefully I'm trying to catch this light here, so I'm not.
You've got very nice studio lighting. I've got nothing to complain about on this end from what I can see of both of you. You look great.
Sounds good. I'm going to see if I can find. Let's see.
Okay, so he's saying he's only active. The only active link he has is networking on his screen.
He may need to
maybe try a different browser.
Either that or just refresh the browser.
Yeah.
Well, I'll send him a quick text back.
Yeah, send the engineer some technical advice. For what it's worth, Chrome seems to work best on Hopin for me.
I agree with that.
I've only used it on Chrome, so I don't have a source of comparison.
My thought was once it worked, I didn't jump to anything else.
I apologize to our audience. We're just getting through the technical aspects of it, despite the dry run yesterday.
This is just proof it happens in all sectors and levels and to everyone.
Never mind housing, jobs, and mobility. Let's just get through home office and browser and Zooming 101.
I think that sort of answers the ever-present question of, will people come back to the office? If after 20 months we're still having trouble, I think people are going to come back to the office. maybe less, and certainly different, but there's nothing quite like a giant stand-up printer copier.
Well, and my video just dropped out, so I missed the last 10 seconds of what you said. There's Goran. All right.
There he is, looking much more professional than I.
Yeah. Well, and I have my office in the background also to show that, I'm actually working.
You're working from work. So, yes, Colin and Goran.
I have a good book behind me there. You don't see that. It's called Fiber. And I bought that to staff and myself 3 years ago, I think it was, or maybe 4. And it talks about how to bring fiber to a community and all the aspects with the digital divide and so on. So, yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah, and now we have it.
And now we've got sponsorship from Ting on some things, and happy to have them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now that we're all here, and I can see we've got an audience that's chatting away in the chat section, let's get started. Thank you all first. Hopefully you're in the right room. This is the Housing, Jobs, and Mobility panel, and I will be moderating for you. But first, let me introduce our 3 panelists, whom really need no introduction. Goran, Eriksson, Colin, Diaz, and Alex Fisch. Alex Fisch, as you heard, if you were in the opening remarks, is our mayor and an attorney by practice. Honored to have him here with us. Goran Eriksson, current council member, past mayor of the Culver City Council as well, and a business owner in Culver City. And then Colin Diaz, president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for the past 4 years. And again, very lucky to have him as well today. I'll be moderating for you. I'm Kevin Lachoff. I am a commercial real estate sales and leasing agent with Newmark Commercial Real Estate. I also in the past was a chair of the chamber and chair of the planning commission. The session today is going to be on housing, jobs, and mobility. These are arguably the 3 most pressing topics in Culver City before the pandemic, and certainly now have continued to be at the heart of nearly every conversation. Our panel will discuss a diversity of thought on these topics and address where they intersect in our community and share potential solutions. So we've got a lot to cover in the next 40 minutes or so. Let's start off though with each of our panelists giving us a more thorough introduction of who they are and some of their initial thoughts. Alex, let's start with you, please.
Sure, thanks. I'm only mayor for a few more days, which I think some on this call are probably pretty happy about, which is fine. But it's been a really great year. I sort of went through what we've accomplished in the last year, and it is really significant. The city's been very busy, and I meant what I said about sort of standing on the shoulders of those who have come before in leading the city. And this is a great panel. I think it's wonderful. You could just rename it, what is a city, right? What is a city other than jobs, housing, and mobility? So, my view of the world is that the reason these things are so in the discussion right now and so important is that we've reached sort of the end of the way that we initially built this city. Well, initially the city was a streetcar suburb, and you can see that in the street grid and a lot of the older parts of the town. But the next way it grew, I sort of call it LA 2.0. It's not really different as much as we distinguish ourselves and should distinguish ourselves from Los Angeles. It's the same development pattern that most of Southern California saw post-war, and we've reached the limits of that. There's a city is defined by how many jobs you can reach within about an hour commute total, and if you look at where the jobs are and what the commute shed is from there, you can see why we have these difficult problems and why we need to address them head on. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Kevin.
All right, well, thank you. And we do have a lot to cover. Yeah, you are absolutely right on a lot of those points already. Goran, Mr. Eriksson, would you please give us an introduction and some of the details on the industry and the outlook?
Yeah, so I've been on the city council since 2016, and I had the benefit of being the mayor when we started to experience the COVID shutdown. So that was a rather intense period. And then on top of that, we got the riots up in Beverly Hills, Santa Monica. And we even had that in a small degree in our city, but we also did a lot of stuff to protect our mall. And that's another story. But so that was a very interesting mayor time. I'm the only mayor who has been mayor but never presided in the city hall council chambers. So, that's a first. Anyhow, so this topic, housing, jobs, and mobility, for me, all these are really central issues, but they are actually regional issues. It's Culver City is such a small part in the West LA area, and we really need to look at this as a regional issue and find regional solutions. So, in Culver City cannot sort of find a balance between all this in our little city because we happen to be a job center now. That was not the case 20 years ago, really, but now it is. But it's benefits the whole West Side. People are living all over and working in our city, so we actually are part of the region, and solutions to all these three very, very simple issues like housing, jobs, and mobility is actually a better regional cooperation, and we are lacking there, definitely. And I would like to see that we somehow could figure out a way to work better with LA primarily, because that's mostly LA, but also Santa Monica and Beverly Hills and West Hollywood, sort of the cities around us. And I hope we can accomplish that. We also have to see who's going to be the new LA mayor. That might change a little how we can work with LA City also. We have people running to become mayors that actually are very familiar with our city. So we see.
All right. Well, thank you. And I think that we'll probably dive deeper into some of those discussions about the regional aspect of these topics as we move on through the panel today. Before we do, though, Colin Diaz, can you please give us an introduction and tell us more about the program?
First of all, thank you to panel as well as our wonderful moderator here, Kevin. This is our third annual economic outlook event, and the last two have been virtual, and the topics have, I don't know if there's a more pertinent topic. I think we kind of joked at the beginning of this that the technology side is fairly important too, and the digital divide there. But when I first started 4 years ago, the big rocks that kind of kept residents and businesses up at night was parking and mobility and housing. And 4 years later, we've grown some of those and jobs as well. I think that there's a nexus between all three of these. You've heard a little bit in terms of what Councilmember Eriksson said about the issues being regional. A lot of my work is with other chambers and communities here on the West Side, and they're battling the same challenges and issues. So I'm looking forward to this discussion because I think that there's in some areas maybe varying viewpoints, which is healthy for discussion and for trying to find solutions. So definitely looking forward to more conversation on this and working towards solution. I'll add one other thing that's a rather large but sometimes underspoken point. You know, the city is going through its general plan update, and every piece of housing, jobs, and mobility is going to be impacted by whatever we come up with. And our council members can correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are parts of our general plan currently that hadn't been touched in about 3 or 4 decades. So not that we would necessarily go that long into the future, but whatever we come up with through the general plan and in terms of land use and how we address our growing city is very impactful. So I think that's an undercurrent to be cognizant of as we have this discussion, because it's, you know, we're not riding in ink. I mean, we're almost riding in you know, permanent marker in terms of what we're setting moving forward.
That is a good framing. Thank you for bringing that up. So, I mean, all three topics, housing, jobs, mobility, I mean, you know, they all weigh, you know, 800 pounds each. I guess I'll ask you, Alex, to start us off, though. I mean, between the three, what would you say is the largest area of concern if you had to rank these, and why?
I think housing. I mean, no surprise that I would answer that, but they really are all interrelated. And the reason I talk about housing so much is that it intersects so many of California's problems. And now that we're exporting that nationwide, it's kind of amazing that something that is in the local purview entirely in the United States, you know, it really is at bottom. You know, housing is a regional issue. Goran's 100% correct, and that's what the regional housing needs assessment is all about. That's what that process is, and it hasn't really meant much in the past. This cycle, it actually does have teeth, and it is a little bit more meaningful. But you know, you look at housing and you see it impacting jobs, you see it impacting climate, you see it impacting mobility, you see it impacting the state's pensions. I mean, it's really, when you really dig into what housing touches, it is at the backbone of all of California's problems. Our sprawl, our wildland fires, and you can trace it all back to housing. So that sort of is the biggest one, but it's also, because it intersects so closely, I think housing and mobility are almost the same question in many ways. Because what we have, I contend, in throughout you know, most of California is something of a density paradox. If you are out in, say, Agoura, and you work in Agoura or, you know, Calabasas, things work fine. You know, being car dependent, it may not be the best for the planet, it may not be best for our lifestyle and all that, but it works. As a city, you know, you can meet your needs pretty easily. If you're in, let's say, you know, Tokyo, you can travel, you can traverse 13 million different, you know, households sufficient for actually more like 20 million people or 30 million people with an hour's commute. So, you know, they have agglomeration effects that impacts jobs, that impacts, you know, creativity. It impacts, you know, what innovations and advancements we make, but they can actually, you know, do that because they have the population density and to have effective mass transit. We're stuck in between those two things. You know, we have gotten to a point where cars don't work well for most people pre-pandemic, and our public transportation infrastructure is not quite there yet and doesn't have the connections between population centers to really start to unlock those agglomeration network effects. So long-winded answer, kind of sprawling, but it's a great question.
And you know, I think that there is, in some regards, you know, just to jump in, you know, perhaps even a chicken and egg scenario, where part of the reason we have such a demand for housing is because we have so many jobs here, and at the end of the day, a lot of it is based on our climate and our weather, you know, in Southern California. I'm going to turn that same question over to you, Goran. Between the three, you know, do you see housing again as the primary area of concern, or what is your ranking of these three issues?
Well, you know, I'm going to start with, jobs. That's the driver, right? And it's we've been fortunate in getting some large employers who's driving in smaller support companies and so on. But that's the driver, and that's really what what then puts us in this situation that we have commutes that are long, and we have housing that gets expensive closer to the major job sites or job centers, and it, that happens all around the world. I read about what's going on in Europe, primarily UK, Germany, and Sweden, because that's the paper I understand. And it's fascinating. They have the same problem except in Berlin, because they still have a lot of empty buildings and stuff from the east side. But it's starting to be a problem in other cities in Europe. Exactly the same thing as we are experiencing. Way too expensive rents, way too expensive to buy in the core of the cities where there's a lot of jobs. So it's actually fascinating. This is a global problem, but we have to deal with it on a local level here in our area of West LA, and housing is a problem in the sense that the west side is already built out. So anything new we put in, we need to tear down something old, and then the question becomes, what is it we tear down and replace with, and is that better or worse? And that's not an easy question always, right? Because usually we tear down older buildings, which usually are the more affordable one, and then we build new ones who usually are market rate. And we passed an inclusionary housing policy in our city, which West Hollywood and Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, we all have it now. That's going to help, but the housing issue is going to be problematic. But we will never be able to get all the housing that people want on the west side, because different people want different things with their housing, and depending on where they are in their life, right? As a young person right out of college, I lived in an apartment I would not live in today, because it would not be sufficient for my family and everything, right? So you have that transition between young to family, midlife, and older, and it's different needs of housing. And I think it's important for us to also be very careful that we make sure that we have all those options in the west side, so we don't just become a lot of large high-rise multifamily buildings, because I don't think that's a as healthy environment as when you have mixed, where you have smaller multifamily, larger, you have townhouses, you have duplexes, fourplexes, single family home, you have it all, because when you traverse life, all those different options actually at some point in life is your preferred way how you would like to live. Our challenge is, of course, to make this as affordable as possible, because that's really the challenge we have now, is that affordability is starting to be challenging for a lot of people, even people that make a decent salary, right? So, but it's, housing is the issue. On a more larger thinking on this, I also think that the state needs to start figuring out how to make other areas in our state attractive to jobs. My son, he works up in Visalia, and up in Visalia, housing is a fraction of it. And if the state would have programs that incentivize certain type of businesses that make sense to actually locate more dispersed over the city, so we can make other areas viable and growing and have a healthy economy, that would also help our whole greater LA, because everything doesn't need to be here. So with regards to jobs, I will go there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off mostly because you're bleeding into question number 2 that's going to be in just a moment, which is some of the solutions and how some of these things might intersect, because it sounds like you're going state level and some of the other incentives that the state could work on and how to balance some of these issues. So before we do that, Colin, I wanted to throw the same question to you. Chamber of Commerce, definitely jobs focused. What do you see between housing, jobs, and mobility as the one with the most gravity here, and why?
Like I could say you're leading the witness with the jobs, but I'll tell you that was kind of going to be my answer. I mean, I think to the point that the mayor made, as well as Councilmember Eriksson, they are all interlinked, and I would almost say, depending on who you ask, I've talked to people that are on certain parts of our city that mobility is exceptionally challenging for them versus other parts of our city because maybe there's more pass-through traffic or where they go is a little bit more difficult. But I do think that the nexus in all this is our jobs because um, there's an opportunity to plan better in terms of housing. You know, I think Councilmember Eriksson was starting to make the point, and I know there's a lot of conversation at council and within the city about affordable housing, which there needs to be units of all types of housing, including affordable. But unfortunately, the real estate in Culver City is such, and the building cost is such that it can be more affordable than it is now. But to achieve true affordability that I think a lot of people would want when they say affordability is something that we may not be able to achieve directly on the west side. But as it relates to jobs, I would say that to me is the strongest one because unless something has drastically changed over the last few years, we are in the middle of a regional hub, and there's a lot of housing going on just outside of our borders. Um, you know, any LA border, if you want, you could say down La Cienega, you can say on Venice and some of the other areas, Overland. So I really think a balance with the jobs that we have in the area and that planning with regards to that, because the one thing that somebody alluded to earlier, we're not quite sure if all of jobs are coming back physically in the office, if there's going to be a need to physically, maybe it's 2 days a week, maybe it's 3 days. I don't know in a crystal ball. Some industries may never go back to 5 days in the office. Others, there's a demand. So my unbiased biased opinion would be jobs, but I can also make an argument of why housing is something that's critical. I think we can impact more of our solutions based off of what we see from jobs because those are here and they're continuing to come here.
Okay, so I'll swing back over to Alex, and I know that that you have ideas and some of the solutions of how these topics will intersect each other, do intersect each other. I guess, give us more of your thoughts on where the nexuses lie between jobs and housing, I guess, and then I think mobility kind of stitches those two together more than anything. But I guess give us your input on how you see these issues and the solutions and how they intersect.
Sure. And, I think a couple, I guess, probably there are four things hanging out there that I want to quickly address that I think actually lead into that well. One is that it's true that housing is globally there's something going on, right? That said, it's all relative, and the average rent in Berlin is 800 euros a month, which is obviously a lot different. It's about a third of what it is here. So while it may be increasing, there is a drastic shortage in California. You can just look, you can count the number of households that are that exist and the number of people, and we're 49th in terms of housing per capita, with 50 being Utah, which you might make some assumptions about household size in Utah based on the demographics. And so you look at affordability across states. And there's a direct correlation between the number of homes per capita, and there's a direct correlation between affordability and also homelessness. Houston and Tampa don't have way lower homelessness rates because they have big bleeding hearts and great services or universal basic income programs. They have cheaper housing as a market question, not because they're providing social housing or because they're producing lots of subsidized housing. They just provide housing because the market, I think that folks on this call would agree, generally works pretty well at stuff when you allow it to. Yet we exert this sort of almost an austerity, like communism mindset on housing, where local control restrains the production of housing, so the market doesn't work. And I'd also point out that cities like Berlin and even Tokyo have a mix of housing. You'll find single-family homes in abundance in both places. You just find more abundant housing generally. So, it is possible. And land prices are high in world-class cities as well. But the question of whether you're going to allow housing to be affordable with high land prices is a purely political one. It goes back to that austerity mindset. And I'd also kind of point out that neighborhoods are always being ripped down. The question is, are you replacing what was there with a McMansion, or something that more households can live in? So again, a political question. And then sort of the final thing hanging out there that I need to address is the idea of job subsidies. They don't work, really. You can compare. Buffalo, New York, which paid hundreds of millions of dollars to an Elon Musk company to produce 5,000 jobs there. The jobs never arrived in those numbers. The jobs that did come were low paying. And during the same time frame, Culver City produced about 10,000 high paying jobs without breaking a sweat, without a single penny of public money other than mandating parking. And so, it's interesting that some of our biggest problems come from, a certain type of regulation that serves an aesthetic purpose, which is valid. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it is an aesthetic purpose. It's a valid discussion. The sooner that we get to that, the sooner that we get to talking about, I don't like that there's going to be more cars on my street. I don't like the way that looks. I don't want shadows. The sooner we get to that, the better. So that's sort of my number one thing, is to have the most candid discussion about root cause issues that we can, because we'll get to solutions faster that way. And my personal view of solutions, I've been pretty vocal about it. It's gentle density everywhere and along corridors and near true quality transit hubs. We need to be providing meeting demand that's not being met. One thing I would really love to see, and I'll wrap it up on this, is along the Move Culver City route, things like that, where there's a different lifestyle that's possible. We often forget that this metro area is, something like 13 million, 18 million people when you really count it. So, why are there so many people who can afford to pay $3 million for a house? Because that's a lot of people, right? And so when you think of the number of people who are very, very affluent out of 13 million people or whatever, 100,000 is nothing for the region. It's huge for the west side of Los Angeles. But what comes with that is that there are a lot of people who want a different lifestyle, whether they're seniors, whether they're people who want to live, not have the cost of $10,000, per car that a household owns and maintains, or they're young people who have different consumer preferences. I would love to see us create an overlay zone in areas with quality transit and access to jobs and day-to-day needs, where there's a covenant that people sign not to own a car or to store it to show proof of storage in some third-party garage. And then just in that overlay zone, if you build a structure that is, a passive house technology, zero emissions kind of thing, and has no parking, you are going to unlock, you're going to meet the needs of a whole lot of people, which I think downtown Los Angeles proves. They just by passing an adaptive reuse ordinance, downtown Los Angeles went from a non-neighborhood, a ghost town, to a 60,000 person community. A lot of those people would like to live on the west side and would pay the rents to support a building and don't necessarily want to own a car. So that's one small little possibility that I think would be quite transformative and would help deal with breaking out of the Gordian knot that we have with all this.
So one of the things that that you mentioned in regard to just, I think, excuse me, jobs and I think you'd mentioned Santa Monica as one of your cities that you had mentioned. And, 10, 15 years ago, they were the darling of the tech industry and the creative economy. And we have siphoned off a lot of those users. And part of it is based on, unfortunately, mobility and the challenge of getting in and out of Santa Monica. These again are so intertwined. I'm going to grab a sip of water.
Yeah, really quickly though, while you do that, can I ask you a question, Kevin?
Of course.
What have commercial rents done in Santa Monica though? Or have they gone down?
Well, they have plateaued compared to where they were, and our rents in Culver City have gone up over the same period because we've been the beneficiary of the high rents in Santa Monica, pushing first to the Playa Vista area and now into Culver City. And again, one of the tenets of Harry Culver originally, all roads lead to Culver City. It has been something we've benefited from, and now as traffic increases here, we are potentially going to make that less of a determining factor in the equation of where businesses choose to locate.
It's definitely a bit of a nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded situation, right? So.
Yep. It's a danger. No doubt. Joran, what's
Councilmember, I just want to say one quick thing, and I apologize, Councilmember, but we ask our businesses often what keeps them up at night, and if somebody asks the chamber that, my answer would be kind of what we're just talking about right now: the retention piece of businesses and jobs. I was in a community before that was mainly manufacturing, industrial, and there were companies that left the state for a number of reasons. They left because policies were, more favorable in other states. They left because property values, all of those things. But it took them 2 to 3 years. They, would come in today and say, hey, our 300 to 400 employees are leaving the state. And 3 years later, they were able to close operations. A lot of these jobs that we're attracting and have attracted over the last 4 to 5 plus years are ones that can leave in a matter of months. And so I understand the kind of supply and demands, I guess, construct, if you will, or concept. But I also think in part of the conversation that we have related to mobility and why I was saying the housing is tied into the jobs is because we can just as easily lose a lot of these jobs. We can be looking at 2030 and talking about 10 to 15,000 jobs that have left Culver City if we're not looking at it as a overarching solution. So I'm not saying necessarily that we shouldn't be looking at mobility or housing, but that was part of the reason why I said that was connected to jobs, because a lot of who we have attracted have come from a few miles away that are same weather, relatively same housing opportunities, if you will. I mean, in terms of geography. So the factors that have attracted them isn't just that we are Culver City and things flow better here. I mean, that's definitely part of it, but it's also the factors that are, some are coming here because of what we do, and some are coming here because they're leaving what took place in other cities.
Okay, so I'm gonna, with just about 10 minutes left in our panel, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. I'm gonna ask that anyone in the audience that has a burning question, please put it in the chat so we can see if we can get to it. But before I address any questions that might come up there, I'm gonna ask low-hanging fruit solutions that anybody has that we can, implement. I know that that some ideas have already been thrown about and some are already being implemented. There's definitely more controversy in town about those, but where haven't we gone yet that it might be, low-hanging fruit for us to focus on first towards getting us, as a city further along in this. And then I guess, how do we address some of these things regionally? Because again, I don't think that we as a city of 40,000 can move the needle enough without having some regional solutions. So I'm going to start with Joran, and then we'll loop over to Alex and Colin.
Okay, so I need to just clarify a few things. So when I talk about incentivize jobs in other areas of the state, I'm not someone who supports tax subsidies to businesses, because if a business moves somewhere for tax subsidy, they will move away somewhere else when that tax subsidy disappears. So I never supported that. No, what you do as a state is that you make sure that you put in a community college or a Cal State into an area. You make sure that you have a top-notch hospital that brings in sort of well-educated medical professionals, but it also makes the area attractive for businesses because you have that. So that is what the state does. It incentivizes a lot of that type, and then the market actually will make it happen. And the reason I say this is because this is what has been done in the Scandinavian countries, where you actually have had this type of efforts. They moved different governmental agencies. They moved them out of the capital, and then they got sort of a good job base and so on. So anyway, that's the next thing is that I would say that Harry Culver say all roads leads to Culver City. I agree. Our problem is with the mobility, I want to make it easy for people to commute into Culver City, whatever means they need. I don't want them to commute through Culver City. I think that's our problem, right? And how you do that, I don't think we figured that out yet. And we're trying, and the Move Culver is one such, real life trial and error. So that's, and I also think that when we start looking at, we will never be able to supply the housing for all the jobs we have in Culver City, right? So we need to look at the commute and the mobility, right? And the problem is that it's like, what came first, the hen or the egg? It's same thing here. If there isn't a sufficient alternative for someone that has a car, they're never going to start to think about going on the light rail and the bus or whatever, right? So, and then to build out sufficient service level cost a lot of money, and there isn't really that kind of money around. Now with the new infrastructure bill that was passed, there might be some money that could be used for that, but it's spread over the whole nation. But this is also the thing is that, it's if we don't have a system for public transportation and they're working, no one's going to leave their car in the garage and try to go by light rail and bus and so on. So I think that for me, and there is no low-hanging fruits in this. I think we've done the low-hanging. For me, to continue working on the public transportation side and really start being smart about it. We're going to get several thousand people showing up for work here in January, February at the Sony and Amazon and Apple and so on. And that's going to be the real test of Move Culver, actually. But it's sort of, it's some of the mobility issues and some of the public transportation issues we actually can do in a relative short time frame to build new housing. We all know that it's a 3-4 year project. So if we talk about low-hanging fruit and look at on a time scale instead, I think that there's some things on the mobility side that we can do because those can be done quicker.
Okay. Alex, I know you've got fruit at various heights in the solution tree. Give us a couple favorites for the 3 topics going into 2022 so we can throw it to Colin before we get kicked out of our room.
Yeah, well, Goran's right that there's no low-hanging fruit on any of this, which is, why it's, I think we, despite public appearances, I think we agree on many things. But obviously, I think we have really good disagreements too. But I think the key thing to remember is something that this group probably knows at a very visceral level, that all change impacts the margins, right? It's the margin. It's every little bit matters because that little bit is what is change. You can sometimes have massive shifts of behavior or public opinion, but that's massive shifts of behavior are largely out of our control, as are shifts of public opinion. So we have to work at the margins and plan for the future. And I think they're actually, I will get very specific though. The most practical low-hanging fruit is permitting. If we can set up rules and processes that are more streamlined, we can still get quality public engagement and get the community's input while fast tracking these projects and getting that 3-4 years down to 18 months. Other cities do it. We can too. At the more grand scale, and I think this is inevitable, Los Angeles is not going to have France's or Tokyo's rail system anytime soon. But what it could have and what would work is a network of bus lanes. I think it's inevitable. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know when there'll be the regional cooperation and political courage to pull it off. But if you can imagine bus rapid transit at 1 mile intervals throughout the entire Los Angeles basin, you can imagine getting to, to Burbank in 30, 40 minutes. It is possible. It is probably inevitable. And I don't know when it's going to happen. But that's an inexpensive, real way to solve that mobility piece. My guess, if I had to guess, is that I think people are fed up with a lot of issues. We'll all pay the price, us elected officials. But people are fed up, and I think people will emerge that are willing to tackle this stuff. And I think the 2028 games will be a catalyst for much of it. Because if you look back at 1984, the region totally changed work schedules and mobility because of the fear of traffic nightmares and athletes being stuck breathing smog on the 405. And it worked. The city functioned well and hosted an amazing games, but then went back to business as usual. And I don't think, if there's one thing that we have all learned, I think from this recovery moment of the pandemic, is that there's no going back. There's only moving forward. So I think the time is near, and I think that's the low-hanging fruit.
So I would round it out to say I agree. There may be lower hanging fruit, but no low hanging fruit. Ultimately, I do think the Olympics will have an impact regionally. That might be the one strongest needle mover, if you will. But it's also, you've seen, I won't name cities that have had the Olympics in the last 10 years that have gone about it kind of the wrong way. They've made changes, but the stakeholders weren't all there, and collectively they were left with poor infrastructure after. So I think that's important. As it relates to housing, I would say, a more focused effort on the commercial corridor. A lot of that has to do with permitting. There's already the ability to have mixed use, and you're seeing some projects like the 11111 Jefferson project. But connected to that from a mobility piece, what I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out in the Move Culver City project, more than the lanes and everything, is the circulator. I think that process, having circulators throughout the city, may help with some of the mobility. And then from a jobs perspective, we're launching a program. We've been working with a lot of businesses in the private sector and would love to partner with the city on this, but having our own essentially job board of Hire Culver, where employers would fly positions a few weeks earlier to Culver City residents. In theory, if they were to hire them, if they were qualified and it made sense, you'd have people that already have housing, mobility would be significantly cut. The likelihood of them staying in their jobs would be significant, and it would be a good community benefit. And then the last part, I think all of this comes through public-private partnership, which, speaking from a private sector standpoint and also to businesses, or also to the city, I think there's a lot more opportunities where businesses have a need that the city also has, and there may be funding sources or solutions that can be found from working together on that.
Colin, I think you at least brought us one piece of fruit that was pretty low that these guys could reach up and pick it. So I think, and you could certainly be the one to be the catalyst to help that. The one thing that we've seen, that wasn't on the margins was the pandemic, and what a game changer that's been. So, there are definitely changes amongst us, and I want to thank all three of you for joining me today on this topic and talking more about it, and hopefully you can make use of that suggestion from Colin, because hey, there's a piece of fruit that was just pretty low that could be picked. Anything else from anyone? Otherwise, I think we've got another session coming up in just a few minutes for everyone to attend.
I just have one quick closing thought, which I think is really optimistic for all of us, so we can celebrate, which is that a lot of these jobs that are coming in, they're really high paying jobs, and they're brand new. These are not, you're not poaching. This is not new. This is not workers invading Culver City. This is the impacts of having tremendous talent located here, so that businesses say, I have an idea. I want to start a new streaming service that didn't exist before, and so I'm going to create 300 $200,000 a year jobs, and that's something we should all celebrate.
Couldn't agree more. I also think those are new thought leaders that can help with some of the other solutions. So just wanted to let everybody know there's a slight break. The next session actually starts in a couple of minutes. So if you want to click on sessions and select, actually there's one session going on. So that the next session starts in a couple of minutes. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you to panel and moderator. I'm going to jump to the next room because I'm actually moderating that one.
All right, everybody. Thank you. And let's wander off into either the networking or the other session. See ya.
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Thank
Bye.
you both.